We're going to keep Jonathan around up here on stage, but let me introduce our other fellow panelists. We have from National Defense University, their visiting faculty chair, Amy Hamilton. From the International Trade Administration, the Chief Information Officer, Gerald Caron, and Merlin's Cybersecurity Solutions Architect, Rick Friend, and once again, Qualys' Chief Information Security Officer and Senior VP of Security Solution Architecture, Jonathan Trull. Thanks all for being here. Amy, kick us off. It's a special day today, a birthday of sorts. It's not yours. That would be PII, and I'm not going to share that information, but the Executive Order 14-0-2-8. We're talking about zero trust. What does that have to do with it, ma'am?
Okay, so for those of you who don't remember, and Jerry and I were just reminiscing as we were preparing for this, so Executive Order 14028, Strengthening Cybersecurity for America, came out 3 years ago today, and what it had was a couple of requirements for agencies, and two of the big ones was a zero trust strategy or plan and a cloud strategy plan at the agency level. And for a lot of agencies, this was the first mandated part of zero trust. And it suddenly came out, and agencies started calling each other, hey, Jerry, what's this zero trust thing, right? And then there was like a white paper on it and a couple things that you could start finding. And it was really sort of the beginning of the journey for agencies. And then about a year later, M2209 came out and continued this journey. And people have heard a lot about it. And a lot of people say, hey, we're tired of this. You know, like it's been 3 years, right? In the end, cybersecurity, it doesn't end, right? Like we have to look at it as holistic cybersecurity. We used to do this very net-centric approach to cybersecurity, and it didn't work. It didn't work in 1986 for Cliff Stoll and the Cuckoo's Egg. It's not working now. And so we are finally addressing what's been known as a very old issue. And to wrap this up in there, HSPD 12 is 20 years old this year. It's like in college. It's going to be like a junior next year. It's like very exciting, right? And when you look at that, we still haven't finished it, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to continue on. ICAM is still important. All of these areas of cybersecurity continue to be important. So we have to look at it as holistic, and we have to look at it as ongoing. We need to stop thinking of cybersecurity as something that you do once and walk away from.
Jerry, based on that, great foundation, Amy, by the way, based on that, what are some of your key focal areas in that zero trust framework umbrella? What are you spending a lot of time on?
Yeah, well, first of all, the first thing we started in the last couple places I've been is know what I have. First of all, do that analysis. If you look at the DoD cybersecurity zero trust strategy, there's a good chart in there. We've been using it in our labs as well at ATARC. There's about 70 functional capabilities in each of the pillars in total, and understanding, using the concept of the DHS maturity model, what do I have already, and what can I do already, and how well am I doing if I am doing it? So you kind of know where you're at, and be able to understand what do I really need. It's not about going and looking at one of the pillars and saying, all right, here's a bunch of tools that do that pillar, let's go buy one. No, you want this. Everything has to work together at the end of the day. So one of the things, a lot of people, they start with identity, which is fine. You can start anywhere. I don't mind. But, I like to focus on the data, because what we're trying to do ultimately in zero trust is we're trying to reduce the blast radius. We're going to get breached. Just face it. You're going to get breached. Reduce that blast radius. What's most important to me? If this gets breached, make sure it doesn't get worse. So build those controls closer around those things that really are meaningful to you, and build them tough, and build them right. And then, so start with that data. Data needs applications to facilitate the access to the data. I like to work the inside out. And then applications need devices to sit on, devices need networks to talk, and then people use networks and devices to access the data. Now, we talk about the effectiveness of risk management. Different risk, depending on what the target data is, how you're accessing it, how you're authenticating, are you coming from a known network where I have telemetry, what type of device, is it fully managed? There's a different level of risk depending on what my target data is, or what kind of user I am even. Am I an administrator, am I not an administrator? So understanding what your risk thresholds are. It's not about the technology so much, but it's understanding what your risk thresholds are for the data that you're protecting and what you're going to allow based on all the factors and telemetry that you can get from the device, the network, the level of data that you're accessing, the type of user, how did that user authenticate, and measuring those constantly, not one time, but measuring those constantly, and depending on what your thresholds are, what you're going to allow the user to do, but constantly checking in real time as possible.
Rick?
Yeah, and I think a huge piece of that is understanding, what the category of the data is, right? We can take the attributes and the risk of an individual identity and what that identity looks like from a risk perspective, and then dynamically block access to data based on the category that's presented.
You, Jonathan, and your company have done research on zero trust. It's been around long enough now to bear fruit, and I'm curious if you've seen, from a broad public sector perspective, any trend lines, any insights, things that stick out or maybe have surprised you from the impact of zero trust across public sector?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think zero trust is a great focus, right? It's not new, like you said, the concepts. Listen, we know attackers were getting in through different mechanisms, and then they're kind of having free reign within the environments once they're inside your networks, and so, I think we are seeing positive results where the dwell time, for attackers is shorter, right? Like they're being detected faster because they have to be noisier in their activities, right? Because now it's getting more difficult. I think we're seeing positive results using automation, and I think automation is key as you get into the more mature stages of zero trust, right? Like in the early maturity, you're kind of doing the blocking and tackling, isolating your networks, doing the identity. But then to really achieve the higher levels, it's about those technologies working together and making contextual decisions without a human in the loop. And definitely once you get to that stage, right, you see tremendous, I feel like, risk reduction. Whether it's auto patching, we see automation where, like Qualys says this device is unhealthy, so it gets automatically isolated within a network until it's remediated. And before, sometimes that activity would take, I hate to say it, months, right? I mean, at times, now that's being done in seconds. So the speed, I think, at which people are moving is getting much faster, actually. So we see very positive results.
But so the key of what he's explaining, though, is becoming more effective. We've talked a lot about, I've heard a lot about compliance in some of the earlier conversations. Compliance can say, must provide authentication. Okay, username and password is compliant, check. But that's not effective. So what you're explaining is we're getting more effective at our cybersecurity by doing some of these principles and things, and that's really important. I'm not poo-pooing on compliance, but at the same time, trying to check a box, people are going to do it the easiest way possible so that they can get a good score.
Yep.
But we really want to be effective at our cybersecurity, and that's what I hear you explaining is better effectiveness at what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Some of those themes I want to get back to shortly, especially automation. Rick, Jerry alluded to this earlier, but I want to draw back to our green room conversation before everybody came on stage. You said integration is really hard work, and it sounds like that has to happen before what Jonathan details, the future state of improving things, improving zero trust. Integration has to happen first. Why is that so messy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, integration for us when we built out the ATARC Zero Trust Lab was the absolute hardest piece of it. We have all these different security tools and we understand what we want to do, but making it do it is a whole nother story. And I felt like, the key to automation and integration, for that matter, was picking the right partner. I mean, that's why we're here with Qualys. I mean, some partners were very, very eager to jump in, to help, to figure it out, right? Because you're taking two different tools that weren't meant to work together, and you're making them do something that they weren't designed to do. And in order to do that, sometimes you need the collaboration between multiple groups, between one OEM and another OEM. And so you really need to pick your partners correctly and understand who you're jumping into this solution with, so that way you got the greatest chance for success. But when we built our lab, that was definitely a big challenge for us. And I'd like to encourage anybody that's here to come and check out the lab that we've built. You don't have to do this zero trust thing alone. I mean, we've already kind of paved the way. ATARC has many different partners, and us being one of them. But we have already done a lot of the hard work, and it's there for you guys to come and check out and see and to learn from.
And Rick, if I can build on that real quick, one of the things that's super important is in the labs even, you have the ability to pick your partners.
Yes.
In reality, if you are out there and you're building a new network and I'm looking for a job eventually, contact me. Because we don't have this, right? Nobody has brand new, fresh greenfield networks and devices and places that they're building. We all have these old brownfields with technology from the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s, the late 1900s, right? And then we move into the 2000s. And we have all this old technology that we are now trying to secure. So it's really, really difficult. It's hard in a lab. The reality of it is exponentially harder.
And I just wanted to mention, that's why I mentioned doing that analysis first. What do I have? What can I take advantage of? Because that may decide what I want to integrate with too, and because if I know what I have, what best integrates with it. Now, it may be this isn't the thing to have, and I may have to do something else, but at least know what you have and what you can take advantage of, and then that helps choose what is best to integrate with.
Amy, I'd like to introduce what you mentioned around data earlier too. In order to make that legacy work well with new software-based systems and build a zero trust framework that actually works, what do you have to look at data? How do you look at it differently, I suppose?
So I know this may come as a shock to people, but we have not done data marking well in the federal government historically. And so there's significant issues with just even knowing what is out there. So there's, first of all, do you even know, when it goes to asset management, do you know what your data is? Do you know where your data lives? Do you know why that data is important? So during the impetus when an ATO is created, you're supposed to put on there what the system's going to have. But the reality is by the time the system actually gets built, rarely does it actually have what you thought you were going to have on it in the beginning. So there's that kind of information data. Then you have operational data in the sense of operational technology, IoT, something that actually causes an actual effect in the physical world, right? And then what's really cool right now with AI, everybody, you can't have a panel unless we mention AI, so check that off your bingo card. But the concept now of inference data, and that goes into the fact that our data stores need to be vaster and larger because the data, the AI is now going ahead and creating more data in this inference data that now we also need to track. So in the end, there's a lot of data to secure. And one of the things Department of Defense recognized a very long time ago is when it comes to information data, you could take a lot of unclassified things, put them together, and end up figuring out very, very quickly things that we do not want you to figure out, from a government perspective. So data is absolutely critical. And one of the best things about labs, and I love labs, that's why I love technology, right? You go into the lab and you can do anything you want, and it's super fun. And there's no users to complain, and tell you that you're in there messing with the system.
That's the best part.
It really is, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens when nerds get together, right? But it's oh, look at this, I could do this on this network, and if I do this with the system, and then reality happens, right? And then that's when the users want to actually use this data and do stuff with the data, and there's certain systems that we can never test on because they're that sensitive. In Department of Energy, we deal with nuclear facilities. Nobody wants us experimenting on this. We want to make sure that by the time we get to that point, we know exactly what the effect will be so that we are not putting anybody in danger or risk. So there's a lot of different components to this. And I know Jerry wants to add on this. I can see it. He's about ready to burst.
I do. I think he's chomping at the bit over there.
No, it's amazing. So people will have network maps, but that's not the same as a data map. You really, and when I hear people talk, they always talk about somebody accessing data, like it's static, it's just sitting there. Data's always in motion. You really got to understand what your data flows are. A lot of system owners from the past I've experienced, they don't know what their data, how it traverses to get to from point A to point B. It's actually going to point C first. Should it be doing that? Probably not. So what's happening? But really understanding your data flows, because how are you going to take action if you don't know what your baseline is? You really got to try to baseline and understand what your data flows are, not your network map, but what your data flows are, so that when abnormal happens, boom, you trigger an action depending on what your risk thresholds are and the factors that you're measuring. So it's really important to kind of get that baseline around your data too, as well as understand what the heck it is. And all data is not created equal. Know what your most important data is and focus on protecting that.
Jonathan, I'd like you to introduce this phrase, a shared signals framework. What does that mean? How does it relate to this conversation? I've heard you talk it before, but our audience has not.
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to partnerships with, think very hard about which vendors you're signing up for. You know, I think one of the most divisive things that can happen is when a vendor tells you, oh, you know, we're a locked, you know, product. We don't share signals outside. You know, which usually means you got to buy more for us for it to work is typically what that means. But the only way for Zero Trust to work is for your ecosystem to share data, right? And I think we in the security world have spent a lot of time on the threat side. Have a SIEM, you have a security data lake, you identify, you know, alerts, threats. We haven't done as much, unfortunately, I don't think, on the automation side as it comes to, you know, identity making contextual decisions, firewalls making contextual decisions. But again, for all of that to work, like there's got to be a standard format about how that data is shared and how you subscribe to that messaging. And you know, so like we've made it a policy to have a very open, you know, shared signals environment, right, where it's easy for us or our partners or customers to take that data and you know, pipe it to whatever, right? Pipe it to Okta, Ping, Active Directory. It doesn't matter. You know, to us, we don't care. We want you to use that data, but you know, for us to be effective, you know, we really need you know, all vendors, right? You know, to adopt, you know, kind of this shared model, you know, where we can exchange data in formats that we understand and we can take action on. So for Zero Trust to be effective globally, broadly, you know, that's an extremely important initiative, I think, that we just can't forget.
Jerry, early on, I remember a Zero Trust conversation I had with you where you said to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, you can't just go out and buy Zero Trust, you know? And it's brought together sort of partner ecosystems in the IT community because people do one thing really good or another thing really well. Multi-factor authentication is one, and where I want to take this question is, are there certain elements of Zero Trust that if people aren't doing them right now, like those are table stakes, you're way behind?
Yeah, first of all, Zero Trust 101. Understand the 5 principles of the way it was intended when it was first born. And don't get in a debate of what, it's the wrong name, it shouldn't be called Zero. I don't care, it's what it's called. Don't divert the conversation. It shouldn't be called Zero Trust, who cares? But really understand what those 5 principles are. Understand what they're trying to accomplish. If you understand, and you can read all the documentation's great, but really, am I following the 5 principles of Zero Trust? Now, the great thing, and thank you for not saying single pane of glass. I hate that phrase. I was waiting for the cringy.
That's too cringy for me.
But I mean, what you said was absolutely correct. And that's really what we need, is we need the vendor to partner together. You can have the greatest thing since sliced bread that does this niche thing. But if I have this brown field, like Amy was talking about, and I have these technologies, and being government, I got to make the most of my investments. You can have the greatest thing since sliced bread, but if I can't integrate it with the rest in my Zero Trust architecture, it's no good to me. I really need to be able to integrate. Multi-factor, of course, there's different things. There's different ways and technologies that do that now. They all have different levels of risk. It depends on what level of risk. I mean, I'm a worldwide organization. I don't have a big infrastructure in order to go and give PIV cards to everybody at every overseas location, but we have a way to do multi-factor for them. So, you know, being 100% multi-factor is great. And it reduced my risk a great deal by, you know, eliminating username and passwords. huge. But again, that integration and those partnerships and being able to talk the same language, so I want to take in as much as I can to make informed decisions and automate as much as I can so that we can reduce that time, reduce that impact when it does happen, because it is going to happen. I keep saying that. Yeah. And reduce that impact. But the more data I have, the more informed decisions I can make, just like anything in the world.
Amy?
So I think that that's important. One of the first things we did at DOE is we created a business case. And we said, okay, zero trust is important, but you can't do everything all at once, right? Like, you have to kind of scope it. So we looked at, once again, data is the most important thing. So how do you protect your data that is getting stolen, for our intellectual property and all these things? And if you look at it, it's right now this whole concept of like harvesting data, collect now, and decrypt later. And this is the whole race for quantum. And so we looked at it as very simple. Use the best multi-factor authentication that you can and encrypt everything to the maximum extent possible that you can. In the meantime, do the rest of the pillars, and we're not saying don't do that, but we really kind of looked at it. We have to protect this data as our critical asset and really putting all hands on deck into those areas. And this was a really, really big push that was coming out of the National Security Council. It was going all the way up to the Vice President's office and getting this feedback of like, how are you doing on MFA and encryption? And it was so critical, and it still is. And this race from quantum really is one of the most important things right now, because if we cannot protect this data, this becomes the last panel when we walked in. They were talking about what's critical. That's it. That's what's critical.
Rick,
Yeah.
maybe I'll ask you to weigh in there, and you can answer any way you want, but I'd also love for you to address, when you walk into an agency and you're helping them with something like MFA, how do you simplify things for them? Because I've seen those trees, I've seen the breakdowns of the NIST and the DoD Zero Trust Framework pillars, and what Jerry is trying to accomplish is so complicated. Like, when you walk in there, how do you simplify that? It might be automation, it might be something else.
Sure, so we'll start with a three-step approach, right? First, like Jerry said, you will get compromised, right? It's just a matter of when. So the first thing we look to do is we look to take away all administrative access from any end device. First and foremost, no administrative access makes it a lot harder to elevate privileges. So first of all, we remove all that. Second, we're looking at privileged accounts. And that's machine accounts, that's non-human accounts, that's service accounts. And we want to eliminate any sort of standing privileged account necessary. Every access for a credential that's going to be used for configuration changes or any sort of administrative access at all is all done on a just-in-time basis. We create those credentials on the spot. They're issued out for a prescribed amount of time, and then those credentials are expired. So even if an adversary were to get onto a device and were to scrape those credentials off of there, they're useless, right? They were used just once, and then it's over. And then on top of that, we're also making sure that we are, providing session recording, so that any sort of administrative access that's being provided is being recorded, whether it be SSH or through a GUI. We need to have that session recorded so we can go back and look and see exactly what was done. There's no question about what kind of configuration changes were made or if anything was made that wasn't authorized, because everything is recorded. And then after that, then we're looking at individual users and the identities. And we're really looking at attributes such as Qualys' true risk, right? Should this user be able to log in with the minimal amount of credentials, or do we need to step up that authentication method and make it even harder for this individual user based upon the risk of that user to log in? And those can be attributes based upon different security tools. That's why it's so important that the integration piece works well together. But it can also be, geographical location. I mean, if this user is logging in from, a Starbucks in Turkey, maybe we need to step up and we need to require more credentials from this individual user in order to give them access to any sort of object, whether it be an application or resource or data. When it talks about data, I think that we really need to focus on how we're able to categorize data very, very quickly. And I see AI ML being a huge player in that as we move forward in looking at data, understanding what it is, and then giving it a category based upon the machine learning, right? Without a human going in and looking at every single piece of data and saying, okay, this is a high value target or this isn't, utilizing machine learning to kind of help to make those decisions so that way we can put the security controls in place to block access to those based upon a true risk score or based upon some other attribute by one of our security tools.
Jonathan, I have a question teed up, but I saw you lean in there, and I'm curious if you wanted to jump in, sir.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think there are components of zero trust that give you a lot of risk reduction for the value, and a lot of it you already own, right? Which is the good thing. Again, you talk about identity and the blast radius once an account gets compromised. Like absolutely, that's got to be a fundamental that you got to focus on. I think some of the other ones that people forget and unfortunately we see happen. You should treat exploitable vulnerabilities on your perimeter like an incident. Like there's no good SLA. I mean, we see, unfortunately, people, those exploits happening within hours of a public release, right? And so, too often we see people kind of forget just, the perimeter, it's not the big deal anymore. Like zero trust is now all about the inside. Yeah, but let's not make it easy, right? Because again. And that's probably why you saw some of the CISA binding directives about perimeters and administrative interfaces. I mean, it's pretty shocking to still see just how many administrative interfaces, and it is part of zero trust, right? Like there's never a good reason to have an administrative interface exposed to the internet, right? Like there are many other ways that you can isolate those. But it's just, things like those, in my opinion, give you a lot of buy down. It's not necessarily a lot of technology per se. That's associated with it. So, I think if you focus on, the identity side, really just doing a clean job as much as possible on the critical systems and getting those vulnerabilities under control that are truly exploitable. Personally, I think you can buy down a ton of risk. And, running incidents, for 5 years around the world, hey, it was always a user account that was, like 80% of the time, right? It was a user account. Administrative interface, it didn't have MFA, it was exposed somehow. You do have the rare ones that are super sophisticated, SolarWinds type scenarios, but honestly, the broad majority are pretty mundane types of initial access.
Amy, what needs to happen to close those gaps? And let me give you a little context ahead of your answer here. You mentioned that NDU is the greatest job that you've ever had. You get to do this combination of teaching and research and public-facing events like this, but you also get a chance to see the future of this cybersecurity landscape. You've mentioned quantum computing. You know what is happening out in China and the race for artificial intelligence and the inherent risks there. So let me kind of tee that back up. Like Jonathan's statement there, what needs to happen to close those gaps? Is it education? Is it more policy or dictates from the White House? What's next?
So I think Jonathan brought up an excellent point about users. And I kind of made fun of users earlier when I was talking about labs, but the bottom line is the whole reason why things have went from computers in a basement with a bunch of IT nerds into the fact that we all have a phone in our pocket is because it's useful, right? Like we have really changed the paradigm of human society, and we're at a point now that we have actually changed how human society interacts because of technology. And when I say that, how many people are old enough to remember traveler's checks? Yeah, right? How many people have used a traveler's check in the past 10 years, right? I don't even know if you could get one anymore. The other thing is just back in the day, I would have left this building and I would have flagged a cab and I would have paid them like cash. There's this thing I used to carry. And I don't have any cash. Like I have an app, the app will get me home. Life is perfect, right? It has really fundamentally changed very, very quickly human society and our interactions with technology. And so much of this is due to computing speed and storage space and all the things that nobody cares about when they're just users of the device. So we have to make it simple for users. But on the other hand, a lot of people have come out and said, hey, a user shouldn't have to understand all these complex things, right? They shouldn't understand complex things, but they need to understand how to operate and interact in the space the same as when you're a kid, what are you taught about if you're on fire, stop, drop, and roll? Come on, was I the only one who learned that as a kid? Right, but we all learn this, like don't touch a hot stove, get a carbon monoxide and smoke detector in your house, right? So we have to learn some basic things to interact in our physical society that the homeowner and a basic user is expected to do. And then there's things that we expect the police departments and fire departments to do for us. And then there's things that we expect our state and our federal governments to do for us. It is literally the same thing now in a cyberspace. And right now, 97% of Americans, this is by Statistica, own a cell phone, and that's over the age of 12. And of that, 9 out of 10 are smartphones. Our world has changed. Our ability to interact with technology has changed. Our physical space operations and how we expect to interact in the world has changed. I used to love 15 years ago, you could walk around DC and you could identify every tourist because they had a map, right? It was easy. Like you knew, like that's a tourist, that's a tourist, that's a tourist. I don't know any of the tourists anymore. I can tell sometimes by the way they dress, but everybody's just got the same phones. They ride our same scooters. Sometimes I'm angry about this. So it has completely changed our interaction in the world. So we have to make sure that users know what they need to know, but it's not going to be mandates. It's going to be all of us working together in this digital ecosystem and community.
Folks, that's a great place to close it on, and it gets us to lunch at perfect timing. I'd like to thank all of our panelists from National Defense University, their visiting faculty chair, Amy Hamilton. We have Merlin Cyber's senior cybersecurity solutions architect, Rick Friend. I'm just going to go with names after this. That's Gerald Caron and Jonathan Trull. Let's give them a round of applause. Before everybody heads off stage, before you grab a plate, just know once again they are out for demos in the meal area. FISMA, CISA's BOD, those reports are available to you. Wonderful information. Get a crash course while you're here and enjoy lunch. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.